this video, we're going to talk about importing your inventory into Flex using the Inventory Import Spreadsheet. This is a service that we offer to Flex customers that allows you to put your inventory into the spreadsheet, and then Flex support will upload this spreadsheet into your system. So it's a quick and easy way to fill your system with inventory without having to do it all one by one in your Flex system. So I guess the first thing that we want to look at is how you can download this inventory import template. If you're a new Flex customer, then you probably got an email that has a link to this template. If you don't have this template, then I'll show you how you can download it. It's pretty easy. You'll just go to manual.flexrentalsolutions.com, and you can either type in the full address, inventory and contacts import with the dashes, or if you just go to manual.flexrentalsolutions.com, click over in the Getting Starting section, and then you'll find the Inventory and Contacts Import page. And from there, just click Download the Inventory Import template. We're not going to talk about it in this video, but you can also download the Contacts Import template from here as well. So just click on that. It will download the XLS file, and then you can open it in Excel and start putting information into that template. And so that's the primary purpose of this video, is to go through that template and to look at each of the different rows and columns, what they mean, and how that's going to look in your Flex system when that all gets imported. So let's go back to the actual Excel sheet, and we'll start looking at some of these rows and explaining what each of them mean. First of all, when you open this, we've programmed it so that it will open starting with this row here, row K, which is where you might start putting in information. All the other rows before that are for Flex support to deal with, so anything you see in red, do not put any information, do not make any changes to these rows. In fact, don't edit or make any changes to any of the header information that you see up here. The only place that you're going to be entering information and making changes is starting underneath the header, where you're going to be putting in the actual information about your inventory. So especially don't touch anything in the red section. Don't even put any information down here. So just ignore that section. That's for Flex support to enter information during the import process. So let's start with these first few yellow columns and talk about what they mean, how to manage models versus units. We'll talk about all the different terminology and how that works within Flex. In fact, let's hop back over to Flex, because I just want to explain a couple of concepts before we even look at how you fill in the information of that spreadsheet. So first of all, inventory and Flex, the two main types of inventory, are going to be serialized inventory and non-serialized. So serialized might be something like this Mackie 450 speaker. This means that I have a generic model set up for the Mackie 450 speaker, which means here's all the generic information like costs, weights, pricing, all of that information about this speaker. But each individual speaker is tracked individually. That's what serialized means. So if I look at the serial numbers tab, this is what represents each of my actual speakers. Each one has its own barcode. I could input a serial number for each one if I want. It's not required, but basically a serialized inventory just means that each individual unit has its own unique barcode that I would put somewhere on each individual speaker. The other type of main inventory would be non-serialized. This might be something like cable, that you don't want to put a unique barcode on each and every cable. I know that some of our customers do that, but a lot of people just don't have the time and resources to serialize each individual cable. So they would set this up as non-serialized, which means that we still have a generic model information for this in the system with the same kind of stuff like pricing, weight, etc. But we don't have serial units. We don't have a serial numbers tab. The quantity is just controlled by a generic quantity that we enter in. So right now we can see that I own, that second number means allocated, I own 67. Right now I only have 32 available because I might have scanned out some quantities to a job, or some of them might be out of commission, etc. And so in the prep process, as I go and I'm scanning inventory out and in from jobs, for non-serialized, I just type in this generic barcode and then enter 10, 20, 30 quantity that I'm scanning. Whereas with a serialized model, I would actually scan each individual unit to scan it in and out. So the reason that I mention that is because that plays into this inventory spreadsheet where when you're putting in item names, you want to be very careful with putting in the correct name, because when you have that model and unit relationship, you need the correct name. You need that to be accurate between those two tabs. And that'll make a little bit more sense when we get to that in just a minute. But I just wanted to explain those two main types of inventory so that it makes a little bit more sense as you're filling out the inventory spreadsheet. The other concept that I want to explain is the resource type. So if we go back into Flex, what you'll notice is that each serialized unit can be assigned to a resource type. I would say 95, if not more, % of what the inventory that you're putting into the system will probably be rental. You might call it something different. Flex is customizable in that you could change the name of that resource type, but by default, that's called rental. And most of your inventory will be rental stock, meaning that it goes in and out of your system multiple times because you're renting it out. There is also retail stock, and so if you are inputting some stuff in that spreadsheet that is part of your retail stock, then you can say so on the spreadsheet. One important thing to note is that the default resource type is always going to be rental. So if what you're putting into this spreadsheet is rental stock, just leave this column blank for that item because Flex will just assume that you mean that you're putting it as rental, so you don't have to type rental in over and over and over. Really, the only time you're going to type something in here is if it's going to be retail or another resource type. One other important thing I'll mention is you'll see here that entries must exist in Flex. What that means is that if you're typing something into this box like retail or any other custom resource type, that entry has to exist in Flex already. Those resource types exist on your system settings menu in the resource types section. So as you can see here, especially if we look at just our inventory resource class, I have rental, retail, and if I had created any custom resource types, that would show here too. So anything that you type into this column must exist in Flex already because Flex needs to route it to that resource type. So if you're putting something in here that's new or custom, make sure that you work with Flex support and that you have that custom resource type already existing in your Flex system. But again, for the most part, it's probably just going to be rental gear, so you would just leave this blank. The next column, quantity owned, this is only applicable for non-serialized models. So for example, if I'm coming in here and I'm saying this is my XLR 10-foot cable, I'm setting this up as a non-serialized because I don't want to put a barcode on each cable, so I would say I own 123 of them or something like that. If I were putting in a item that I intend to be serialized, like that Mackie 450 speaker, I would not put a quantity here because the quantity is going to be controlled by how many units I put into the units tab down here. And so we'll look at that when we get to that tab. So again, just a couple more examples. I might be saying something like VGA 50-foot cable. I'm going to have that be non-serialized in my system. I own 34 of them. So that when we import this into Flex, then the information that we have in the quantity tab will be filled out for us already. So that's what that quantity tab means. Again, if it's serialized, leave it blank, and the quantities will be determined by what you put into the units tab. We also have a size tab. This is optional, but notice like what I've been doing here with XLR 10-foot cable, VGA 50-foot cable. If I wanted to, I could just keep those as blank on this, or not include the size, I should say, and just have generic names, and the size is determined in the size column here. So what this means is that I might have multiple rows that are called XLR cable, but they're unique in what I put in the size field. And you'll notice that up here is that you can't have duplicates in this column unless there is something put into the size field that makes it unique. So if I were to just say XLR cable a bunch of times and not have anything unique in the size field, then that won't work. Flex support will review that and look at it and say, well, there's nothing unique here, so these are just straight up duplicates, and they would ask you to either change the name or put something into the size field. But again, like I said, the size field is just optional. Some people like to do it that way. Some people don't care. Some people just like to put the size directly into the item name. There's no wrong or right way to do it. It's just up to you and how you want to keep things organized in your system. So that's the difference between those, and that's why you can potentially have duplicate names in here, but only if you have something unique in the size field over here. So that might work for different cables, that might work for like TVs, things that do have a specific size but could be essentially the same exact thing in the description. They're just differentiated by a different size. So either way you want to do that doesn't really matter. I tend to put the size just into the item name, but again, no wrong or right way to do that. There's a bunch of other fields as we go along here that are just optional, but I'll explain what they mean. Shorthand is just kind of short name is just a shorter way to describe the item. The best way that I like to describe this is that the item name is going to be full descriptive. This is what's going to show up when you build a quote. So I might put Mackie 450 PA speaker. It might be a longer name, but then the short name, I would just put Mackie 450. How this shows up in Flex is like this. Mackie 450 active PA speaker is what would show up on a quote when I put this item on a quote, but the item short name is what shows up over here in the inventory browser, in the resource browser that we have here in the tree. So the purpose really is just that you have a shorter name over here because people who are looking at this tree tend to know what these things mean, whereas Mackie 450 on a quote might not make as much sense because most people might not know that that's a speaker. So you put the full descriptive name in there as something that would go on a quote, and a short name as something that is more of an internal, something that only people using Flex would actually see. If you don't put an item short name in, then the inventory tree will just default to the full descriptive name. And so that's why I say a lot of these are optional. If you don't really want to put anything in here, if you don't know what to put in here, you don't have to. But I just want to explain what they mean. The item shorthand is just kind of an abbreviated name. A lot of people refer to this as a code for this inventory. This is kind of a carryover from older inventory management programs where you might want to use a shorthand to be able to search for something in your system. So like if I go over here and say Mac 450, that would be a code that I could use to pull up this inventory model. Some people like to use these, some people don't care, so it is there just as an option for you. The inventory group is another pretty important one that you want to make sure you get right. So you may have already have some inventory groups set up in your system. You may not. You may have an idea of how you want your inventory groups to be organized. Maybe just parent categories like video, audio, and then subcategories underneath that. And then maybe you even have a third category under that. We typically don't recommend going past 3, maybe 4, just because then you start getting into a lot of clicking and having to open too many folders. But that's basically what we mean on the spreadsheet when we're talking about groups. You have the first level, second level, third level, etc. So when we come in here, the parent inventory group, in the case of this Mackie 450 speaker, would be audio, at least in terms of how I have that set up in my system here. So here's the parent group. And then subgroup 1 would be speakers. Subgroup 2 would be active. So if I were to import this item into my system right now, it would go into audio speakers powered. Not active. Does that make sense? So audio speakers powered. Maybe my VGA cable I would want to put into video cable VGA. And so that would look like this. Video cable VGA. And like I said, I could just do 1 deep, I could go 2, 3, 4 deep. You can go up to 6 deep, but a lot of times, like I said, that becomes a little bit cumbersome. We usually don't recommend going that deep unless you absolutely have to. So let's say maybe on our, oh, you know what, we're on the right ones. So like for XLR cable, I might just go audio XLR. And I could copy and paste these for things that are similar. So that's kind of what these different inventory groups and subgroups mean. Just know that the parent group is going to be the topmost one, and then any subgroup after that would be something like this. Let's move over and look at the barcode now. This one is really important. If you don't have barcodes already for your inventory, if you're just importing inventory that's never been inside of a management system before and you don't have barcodes associated with them, you'll just leave this blank. Flex will auto-create barcodes for you. If you do have barcodes in here, then you can enter them into this column. So let's look at a couple examples, and we have an extra note here just to explain this even further. You can move that note out of the way just so you can actually use this column. But let's say, for example, that my non-serialized audio, my XLR cable, 10-foot, let's say that I already have a number that I've used in a previous inventory management system for that, and it's barcode 00239. And remember, for non-serialized items, this is just going to be that reference barcode, the one that you type in when you're scanning things in and out so that you can enter the generic quantity that you're scanning in and out. Model barcodes can also be associated with serialized inventory. Keep in mind, though, that this model barcode isn't going to be the barcode that you scan to scan inventory in and out. We just need a model barcode to be there for more reference purposes. But then it's the actual unit barcodes that will be the things that you scan. So again, let's say in this scenario, I don't have a model barcode associated with this Mackie 450 speaker, so I'll just leave it blank. Same with my VGA cable. Maybe this is the first time I'm importing this non-serialized item into an inventory management system, so I don't already have a barcode associated with that, so I'll leave it blank. But then my XLR cable 25, I do have a barcode that I use already. Same with my 50s. Let's just enter those. The important thing here is that you cannot have duplicates. So be really careful about that. You can't have duplicates in this column, and you can't have duplicates from this column and in the barcode column for the units tab. Of course, Flex support will check that for you and just double check you don't have any duplicates, but please just make sure that you don't have duplicates here. Just because that will cause errors when we're importing into Flex. So again, if you already have barcodes that you've used before and you don't want those to change, you can input those here. But if you don't have barcodes, this is the first time you've ever used an inventory management system, or you're just starting from scratch, then leave this blank and Flex will auto-create something for you. Move this note over so it's not in the way. A few other things that are kind of, just more optional things. You can put a manufacturer, part number, manufacturer country. All that stuff is just information that's stored in Flex for your purposes. Like here I put manufacturer's Mackie. I might have had a part number or something in there. All just things that I can go and reference in the system, whether that makes it easier to order things or if you need like manufacturer info to print out on a manifest. All of that information you can put into an inventory model. Again, it's optional, so don't worry about if you don't need that information. Don't worry about having to put it in there for everything, but a lot of times it is useful to have that in there. As we move along, we also have where we could tell the system whether or not this item is serialized. So if tracked by serial number is yes, just enter a Y. If it's no, don't enter anything. And we say as much here in the description. Enter yes values as a Y, anything else is just no. So you don't have to do Y and N, only do Y for things that are serialized. So in my example, so far only this Mackie 450 speaker is serialized. Let's add something else in here just so that we have another serialized item, like I might say like a Sharp 50-inch LCD monitor or something like that. I'm not going to put in a short name, but I do want to make sure we have inventory groups. So that would go into video parent group, monitor subgroup. And then for tracked by serial number, I would put just a simple Y. And I'd want to do the same thing on my row 5, which is my Mackie 450 speaker. So we have 2 items that we consider to be serialized, but the items that are non-serialized or not tracked by serial number, we just leave blank. We don't have to put an N in there for no, just leave it blank. We also have a column that lets you determine whether or not, or tell Flex whether or not the item is virtual. So virtual items are things like packages, things that aren't really physical inventory items, but more represent either a group or a bunch of inventory items or something like that. So a couple examples that I have in this system would be like, I had a good one in my screens group if I recall. Projection screens. So we have a 9x16 screen package. This isn't the physical inventory item itself, this is a virtual item. Its contents include all of the physical items, but this item itself is just considered virtual. Same with like my Shure wireless mic package. This is virtual. This isn't an actual item itself. This is something I could put on a quote that would automatically add all of the actual components. So that's what virtual items are, and if you have one in your Flex system, you could tell Flex that it's virtual. So if I added a row 10 and it was a virtual item, I would just put a Y right here. Again, anything else, a blank line, is just considered no. So if it's not virtual, just leave it blank. And then we also have model container or unit container. These ones, and free pick container. These ones determine whether or not the item is going to be a container type, and that unit container would be scanning things into the container. Model container is kind of like accessories. So if you have maybe the Mackie 450 speaker and you want to send accessories with it, like a couple XLR cables or the power plug, I could put, yes, this is model container, so that when I import it into the system, I could put in, well, what are the contents that go with this speaker? So that's what model container means, is that they're kind of more accessories that go with this parent model when I put it on a quote. Whereas a unit container, or this column here, this is something that's pretty cool you can do within Flex. You could set up inventory models to be unit containers and actually scan things into those unit containers. So an example in my system would be a shipping case. In fact, here we have this 450 speaker case. This is a unit container, and that means that each of my serial units, or each of the barcodes, each case that I own, can have content scanned into it. So I scan in speakers, cables, XLR cable, and those would live in this speaker case. So that's what we mean by unit container. So if any of these should be considered as a unit container, then you just put a Y in there as well. And just like anything else, if it's blank, it's considered no. So you don't have to do N for no, just leave it blank. And then a free pick container is going to be more of a If it's something that when you scan during a prep process, if you want to be able to scan things into that container as you go. I'm not going to show full examples of this. We have some videos on YouTube about both unit containers and FreePick containers if you want to learn more about that. A lot of people just leave these blank, and then when they after they import their inventory, they could just go in and make those changes in the inventory item settings. But if you are certain that you have something that's either a model, unit, or FreePick container, then you can put the Y in this column so that it will import as such. You can also say, yes, this is expendable, meaning that this is an item that once you scan it out, you don't expect it to come back. So you could put a Y in there as well for yes. You can also put in weight and logistic information. Again, this is kind of like the resource type that we talked about earlier. If you put in a weight unit, it should exist in your Flex system already. And those are found on System Settings, Units of Measure. So some of the defaults are just going to be like pound, each, foot, inch, etc., kilogram. And so if you want to put the weight unit in here, for example, maybe for the Mackie 450 speaker, I would say pound, because that's what exists in my system already. It's called pound. And I would use the singular version. And then I would put what the actual weight in pounds is. Maybe do the same for my Sharp TV, pound. And I have no idea what that weighs. I'll just say 20. Might be a lot more, but you get the idea. So you'd put in, oops, accidentally copied that. So put in the weight unit, and again, it has to exist in Flex, and it should be the singular version, and then the actual weight. And then same with linear unit. This might be inches, feet, whatever. Just make sure that you put that in the system, or actually, in this case, I would do foot, because we're doing the singular version. Foot. And then you say height, which, again, I have no idea what these are, but just put in some quick numbers. Height, length, width. So that's how you can do that. Again, just make sure you're using the singular and make sure that it's something that exists in your system already. And if you want to do a custom one, just make sure that you work with Flex support in getting that created in your system first, and then putting it into this spreadsheet. Because if not, then there might be some errors with routing that properly to your inventory. We also have a track running hours feature. This just means if you say yes every time you scan one of these items, it's only for serialized items. But if I say that like my Sharp TV, for example, is tracked running hours yes, then whenever I scan one of those units, Flex would prompt me to enter how long it ran since its last, since the last time you scanned it. So again, only enter yes or a Y if it's yes. If it's no, just leave it blank. And then of course you could put in purchase costs. No currency. Don't put the currency format in there, just put a number. Replacement cost. All that information can be put in here. And then we start getting into the cost and price in terms of how that appears on a quote. So purchase and replacement cost is one thing. This is how much it costs you to purchase it, how much it costs you to replace it. But then the pricing model price and costs, these have more to do with when I put this on a quote, how much is it costing me to send that out for that job? And that's a really hard number to come up with sometimes, and a lot of people don't know what to put here. Some people just put, well, what is the cost to send it, to ship it, the labor involved to prep it? That might be anything between like $10, $20 for each unit that gets sent out on a job. So that's up to you to decide. But the price for the pricing model, this one's a little bit easier. This is what you're charging your customer. So I might charge $50 day rate or a $50 rate for this speaker. Maybe a $1 rate for the XLR cable. And of course, we could do decimals and things like that here if you want to be more specific, but and one important thing is that you're not making any changes to up here. What you're doing is saying, okay, my pricing model 1, determine what you want that to be. Do you want that to be your day rate, your each rate, or your week rate, etc.? Put that information in here, and then when you're emailing this to Flex support, tell them, okay, my pricing model 1 is my day rate. My pricing model 2 is my each rate, etc. Again, a lot of times you may not even have this information yet. You haven't decided what you're going to charge, so you could just potentially leave this blank and just put that information in once you have already imported it. But if you know that information, go ahead and put it in. Save yourself a little bit of time. Start putting that in now. And like I said, make sure that when you email this to Flex support, that you're telling them what your pricing model 1 is. So in my scenario, pricing model 1 is my day rate. If we look at my different pricing models, I have a day rate, I have a week rate, I should have an each rate, so I would just specify to Flex when I email in, again, don't make any changes on this spreadsheet, but just tell them my pricing model 1 is my day rate, my pricing model 2 is my whatever rate, just so that they know when they're importing how to route those. And you can do quite a few pricing models. A lot of people typically just have like a day rate, that might be their pricing model 1, and each rate as their 2, maybe a week rate, but even your week rate can just be a multiple of your day rate. So maybe you do your week rate as your day rate times 3, so you wouldn't even enter anything in here. A couple different ways you could do that, but that's kind of how you would manage that. And then the last few columns we have line mute by default. That means when you put this item on a quote, do you want it to line mute, meaning it wouldn't show up on a PDF copy that you print out. So it would just be there for display purposes here in Flex, but when you print a PDF, that line would never show. So there might be some things in your system that are just more internal that you don't need your customers to see. And then hiding the item. If you were to say, yes, I want this item to be hidden, that means that only people in Flex with permission would be able to see this item in the inventory tree and be able to add it to a quote. So you might say hide this item, yes, because you don't want everybody to be able to see it, except for maybe administrators who have permission to view hidden items. We also have a narrative description. A lot of people don't really use this, but it's just kind of a long form description of the inventory that you can use on some reports in Flex. Item display ordinal just says where do you want this item to appear within the group that you assigned it to. So for example, my speaker was this row 5. Maybe I want that to appear first. So I would say make that appear first. And if I had another speaker somewhere down my list, I'd say make that appear second. Otherwise, I think it just imports alphabetically. A lot of people don't pay too much mind to this. They just want it to import, and maybe they'll reorganize it later after it's been imported. You could just really quickly and easily reorganize things just by dragging and dropping. But if that is important to you, the ordinal within the inventory group, then you can enter that information here. And then same with group ordinal. This basically just means whatever the parent group that you assign this to, where do you want that parent group to appear in your overall inventory tree. So for example, remember how I assigned this Mackie 450 speaker to audio? Maybe I want my parent audio group to be very first and video to be second. And I should only have to do this once. So let's just do it once on this inventory or on this speaker. And then my video group, which was this line 6, my VGA, I want that to be second. So the way that would look in Flex is audio would be first, video would be second, etc. But again, a lot of people don't really worry about this. They just want to get their inventory groups created, and then you can really easily just drag and drop those once they've been created in your system. And then last on the Models tab is a storage section. And so what this means, if you look at an inventory model in Flex, we have a tab that's called bin. This tells you for each location where this is stored. So section, aisle, shelf, bin. And you can access this information on scanning screens and different reports and just make it a little bit easier for you to know where everything is in your warehouse. And so you would enter a section, an aisle, shelf. And again, these are all optional. You might just put section in. You might do all 4 of these, but they're all there for your convenience if you want to use them. And so that's all of the different columns that you would fill in on the Models tab. Again, the really important ones, of course, are going to be the name. If it's non-serialized, enter a quantity, that generic quantity. But if it's serialized, don't enter a quantity because that will be determined in the Units tab. And then, of course, which inventory group you want to go in. And then when it comes to the barcode, if you have an existing barcode for this inventory, a model barcode, you can enter it here. But if not, Flex will just auto-create one for you. And that's a great way to segue into the Units tab, because let's take, for example, this serialized item, the Mackie 450 speaker. Let's say that I'm importing this. I don't have any barcodes for the 20 some odd speakers that I own. This model barcode, again, really doesn't mean any sort of barcode that you're going to be scanning in your Flex system. The model barcode is really just more of a reference barcode for Flex to be able to route to this inventory item in some situations, but it's really just more reference, and it's these unit barcodes that are the ones that are going to be doing all of the work. So in this scenario, on the Models tab, which I'm currently on, I would just leave this blank, and Flex will auto-create that reference barcode, that model barcode for this serialized item. But it's on the Units tab that I'm actually going to enter all of the different units that I own. And if any of them have barcodes that exist, I could put them in here, or again, I could leave them blank, and Flex would auto-create those barcodes for me. So let's do 2 scenarios here. Oops. Number 1, our Mackie 450 PA speaker. I'm going to copy this item name because it's really important that the item name or the model name matches exactly from the Models tab to the Units tab so that it could make the appropriate connection. Because again, this is just the generic model information. It's really important to have all this in the system, but it's the Units tab that is going to let me create as many units that I actually own. So let's say that I own, let's just keep it simple and say I own about 10 or so. So I would create a separate line on the Units tab for each 10 that I own. And again, it has to be exact, matching the Models tab item name. So I just copied and pasted to make that easier for me. Let's look at some of the columns that we have on the Units tab. There's a lot fewer, so it's a lot easier for you to manage. Again, we have a resource type column. For serialized items, then you might want to say, this is rental. I'm sorry, you would leave it blank for rental, but maybe one of them is retail. And so you would specify in this column. But if everything you own is just rental stock, just leave it blank. And it says as much up here in the header. Just leave it blank, but anything else, actually put something in there. So all my 450s are rental. I'm just going to leave it like that. Again, the size. If you want to put a size in here, it has to match what you put in the size column on the Models tab. So if you put something here, make sure that it matches here on the Units tab. Now we start getting into some of the unique columns for units, like a manufacturer serial number. I don't have to put a serial number in here, but a lot of times we recommend it just because if you're tracking this inventory, maybe you lose something, it's nice to have that serial number information so that you can report what serial number went missing. So I'm just going to put in some nonsense serial numbers. Maybe this one's scratched off. I don't know what it is. I could just leave that blank. But again, this is just optional. I don't have to put a serial number. That's a common misconception if something is tracked by serial number that you need a serial number. That's not the case. I know people that serialize their cables, and those definitely don't have serial numbers. But it is something that you can put in here if you want. Same with stencil. A lot of times you might put some sort of marking on each speaker, like this is speaker A, this is speaker B, C, etc. That might be overkill for speakers, but a lot of times on cases and things like that, you might have a stencil or marking on the outside of that unit, and you can put that into Flex to be associated so that you can keep track of that in your Flex system too. And then here's the unit barcode that we were talking about. Again, if I'm putting anything into this column, I can't have duplicates. Can't have duplicates here. I can't have duplicates between here and on the Models tab. But in this scenario, I've never barcoded these before, so I'm just going to leave it blank. Flex will create those barcodes automatically for me, and then I can print them later. I also have the option to enter like a model number. If these were like generic items, so maybe I'm serializing DI boxes, but I have like 10 different types of DI boxes that I'm putting under the same model on the Models tab. So if I'm creating DI box here, I'm putting that into audio, just maybe accessories or something like that. But I am going to serialize it, so I would say attract by serial number is yes. Then what I'm going to have to do is take that model name, make sure it's exact, put it over here on my Units tab. But let's say these two are some of those IMP2s. But then these ones might be something else, like a Digitech something something. So you could put that in there so that you can sort of differentiate these different models, but they're all going to still live under the same inventory item. So that's kind of what the models here means. Again, totally optional. I don't have to put it there. The serial location is an important one too, especially if you have multiple locations in your system. If you just have one location, then you would just put your single location. Maybe in this case, it's just Salt Lake City. Just put that as where it's going to live for all of my serialized inventory. But if you have multiple locations, then you might have a different warehouse that you want some of them to be in. And you would specify that here. Again, this is really specific to say that entries must exist in Flex already. So whatever the warehouse names that you used when you were setting up your Flex system, it has to be exact. I find that information in System Settings, Business Locations. Here I have Salt Lake City and I have Denver. And so anything I put in here has to match those names exactly. I could also do a purchase date. It has to be in month, day, year format. Purchase currency, purchase cost, and a PO number, which the unit was purchased. Again, all optional, but you can put those in there if you want. Let's quickly look at our second scenario. Maybe this Sharp 50-inch LCD monitor. Again, we set this up as serialized, so we'll have model information on this tab, but we need to go to the units to set up each actual unit that I own. Let's say I only own 5. Let's say that they're all rental, so I'm just going to leave this blank because that's going to be my default. Remember, if default is rental, leave it blank. But if it's something else, I could put the resource type in there. I'll put in serial numbers. Again, I'm just kind of putting in some nonsense. Maybe these ones actually have stencils. This is TV1. This is TV2. Just giving you an idea of how you might use all of these fields. But in this case, let's say that I already had these TVs in another inventory system. They already have barcodes on it that I use to scan in and out. So I would put those barcodes here in this area. Again, I left those blank on the Mackie 450s because I want Flex to just create them for me. But if they already exist, if these already have barcodes stickied on them, I might as well just reuse those. But again, I cannot do duplicates. I could do model number if I want. Again, I want to put in fact, let's fill out everything just so that we have it looking pretty good. All my DI boxes and monitors are going to live in Salt Lake City, and I could put date purchase, currency, etc. in there if I want. So that's really how we do this import sheet. I think we covered all the columns pretty well. Just as a recap, do not change or put information into any of the red columns. That's for internal flex purposes. If you have anything that isn't rental or the default resource type, then you can enter that here. Otherwise, leave it blank. For quantities, only enter quantities for non-serialized items. But if you have serialized items, you're not going to put quantities here because the quantity will be determined by how many you put into the units tab. And then again, a lot of this other stuff is just optional, but the important ones are making sure you assign it to an inventory group. The parent group will be the topmost group, and then subgroups under that. You can go as many as 6 deep, but we typically recommend only going 2 or 3 deep. Model barcode is more of the reference barcode. It's the barcode that you'll use to scan non-serialized items and enter quantities, but for serialized items, it's just there for reference. You're not really scanning that barcode. If it exists already, if you have a barcode that you've been using for years, you could enter it here. If not, just leave it blank and Flex will auto-create it for you. Make sure you, if it is a serialized item and tracked by serial number, to put a Y. But on all of these, remember, if it's no, just leave it blank. You don't need to put an N in there. Weight units must exist in your system, and put it in exactly as it exists in your system. Same with linear units. And then when you get down to the pricing, you can put information in here, but don't change anything here. Just email when you're sending this in. Make sure that you mention to Flex Support what your pricing model 1 should be called, pricing model 2, etc. And then the last few options, line muting, hiding the item, what the hierarchy for this item is within its group. Does it appear up top or down low? Storage bin locations. And then, of course, for the units, just make sure that the name is exact matching on the Models tab for whatever this inventory was. If you have specific resource types, you could put that here. Otherwise, rental is just the blank default. You can enter serial numbers if you have them. Leave it blank. Leave the barcode blank if you want Flex to create one. If you have one that exists already, you can enter it here. And then just making sure that you enter which location you want this inventory to go to, or to which location that inventory is considered living in. So once that's filled out, you just send it into Flex Support. They'll look for any mistakes or things that need to be changed, and then they'll import it into your system, and you'll have a nice inventory tree with all your inventory set up just like this. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about the inventory import spreadsheet, feel free to email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.